Good evening, dear friends. My name is Margaret, and for the past 15 years, I've been reading your letters and emails, sharing your stories with this community we've built together. Tonight, I hold in my hands a letter that arrived last week from New Orleans. The envelope was worn, as if it had traveled through time itself. Inside, I found pages filled with words that still shake me to my core. The woman who wrote to me is named Sarah Mitchell, a nurse who lived through Hurricane Katrina in 2005. She told me she's carried this story for 20 years, unable to speak it aloud until now. She asked me to share it with you, hoping that by releasing these memories into the world, she might finally find peace. So tonight, I invite you to sit with me as I read Sarah's words. This is her story, in her voice, exactly as she wrote it to me. Dear Margaret, I'm writing to you because I can't carry this alone anymore. 20 years have passed since Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, but some nights I still wake up hearing the sounds, the wind, the screams, the silence that came after. I was 32 years old then, working as an ICU nurse at Charity Hospital in downtown New Orleans. People ask me what I saw, what it was really like. I've tried to explain, but words always failed me. Until now, August 28, 2005, the day before Katrina made landfall. I remember standing on the roof of Charity Hospital during my break, watching the sky turn an unnatural shade of gray-green. The humidity was suffocating, wrapping around us like a wet blanket. Below, the streets were emptying as people evacuated. But inside the hospital, we were preparing to stay. We had patients who couldn't be moved, people on ventilators, in comas, recovering from major surgeries. Someone had to stay with them. My shift supervisor, a woman named Dorothy Williams, who'd been nursing for 35 years, gathered us in the break room that afternoon. I can still see her face, tired, worried, but determined. Those of you who are staying, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This storm is Category 5. We don't know how bad it's going to get. We don't know if help will come quickly. But these patients need us. 15 of us volunteered to stay. I called my husband James, who was evacuating with our 2 daughters to his sister's place in Baton Rouge. Please come with us, he begged. I can still hear the desperation in his voice through the phone, but I couldn't. I had patients in the ICU who depended on me. Mrs. Patterson, 78, recovering from open-heart surgery. Marcus, a 19-year-old boy who'd been in a car accident, fighting for his life on a ventilator. How could I leave them? That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about my daughters. Emma was 7, Sophie was 5. I'd kissed them goodbye that morning, promising I'd see them in a few days. Now, lying on a cot in the nurse's lounge, listening to the wind starting to pick up outside, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. We spent the evening moving patients away from windows, stocking supplies, filling bathtubs and containers with water. The hospital administrator, Mr. Chen, assured us that the generators would keep running, that we had enough fuel for a week at least. The National Guard would come as soon as the storm passed. We just had to hold on. Around midnight, I went to check on Marcus. His mother, Linda, had refused to evacuate, choosing to stay by her son's bedside. She was a small woman, maybe 45, with tired eyes that never left her boy's face. When I entered the room to check his vitals, she looked up at me. "You think he knows we're here?" she asked quietly. I adjusted Marcus's IV line, checking the ventilator settings. I believe he does. Talk to him. Hold his hand. It matters. She reached out and gently touched her son's fingers, so careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "Mama's right here." The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Linda's eyes met mine, and in that moment, we both knew the storm was coming, and there was no turning back. August 29th, 2005, the day that changed everything. Katrina made landfall at dawn. I was in the ICU when the windows started rattling so violently I thought they'd shatter. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. A freight train combined with 1,000 angry voices, roaring without pause. The building swayed. I grabbed onto the nearest bed rail to steady myself. "Everyone stay calm!" Dorothy's voice cut through the chaos. "Check your patients. Make sure all equipment is secure." We worked through the storm, moving between patients, checking ventilators, monitoring vital signs. Every few minutes the lights would flicker, making our hearts stop, but the generators held. Outside, through the reinforced windows, we could see debris flying past, Roof tiles, tree branches, things I couldn't identify spinning through the air like deadly projectiles. By late morning, the worst of the wind had passed. We allowed ourselves to believe we'd made it through. Mr. Chen came through the ICU, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the air conditioning. Good work, everyone. The storm's moved inland. We should have help by tomorrow. But that afternoon, everything changed. One of the maintenance workers, a man named Thomas who'd worked at Charity for 20 years, came running up the stairs to the ICU, his face pale. "The basement's flooding," he said, breathless. "Water's coming in fast." Dorothy grabbed his arm. "From the storm surge?" "No," Thomas said, and his voice shook. "It's everywhere. The streets outside, the water's rising. I think the levees broke." We rushed to the windows. The sight below made my blood run cold. Water was pouring through the streets like a river, rising visibly, 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. Cars were floating. The ground floor of the hospital, which had been dry hours before, was disappearing beneath murky brown water. "Oh, God," someone whispered behind me. The power went out. The sudden darkness and silence were terrifying, until the generators kicked in moments later, bringing back lights and the reassuring hum of medical equipment. But we all knew, if the water kept rising, if it reached the generators in the basement, Dorothy called us together. "Listen to me. The water's still rising. We need to move all ground floor patients upstairs immediately. Sarah, you coordinate ICU transfers. We're moving everyone up 2 more floors." The next hours were chaos. We wheeled beds, carried equipment, hauled supplies up the stairwells. The elevators were too risky. If the power failed completely, patients could be trapped. My legs burned as I ran up and down stairs, helping to move ventilators, IV poles, monitors. Some patients we carried on backboards, nurses and orderlies working together to navigate the narrow stairwells. Marcus's mother, Linda, helped however she could, carrying supplies while we moved her son's bed. I saw tears streaming down her face as we wheeled Marcus into the new ICU setup on the 7th floor, but she didn't make a sound. She just kept moving, kept helping. By nightfall, we'd relocated everyone from the lower floors, but the water outside was still rising. From the 7th floor, we could see it, a vast, toxic brown lake where the city used to be. Houses submerged to their roofs, streetlights standing like lighthouses in an urban sea. And everywhere, desperate people on rooftops, waving shirts, begging for rescue. That night, the temperatures soared. With the air conditioning failing intermittently, the hospital became a furnace. We opened windows for ventilation, but the air outside was thick and humid, offering no relief. Patients were sweating through their gowns. We used wet towels to cool them, rationing our water carefully. Around midnight, I was checking Mrs. Patterson's surgical incision when I heard shouting from the hallway. I ran out to find a group of people, civilians who'd broken into the hospital seeking refuge, demanding to be let into the upper floors. Security was trying to manage the situation, but tensions were high. "Please!" a woman screamed, holding a crying baby. "We have nowhere else to go. The water took everything." Dorothy stepped forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "We'll help you, but you need to stay in designated areas. We have critically ill patients here who need our full attention. Do you understand?" The woman nodded, tears on her cheeks, clutching her baby tighter. By the end of that first night after the levees broke, we'd taken in over 50 refugees. They filled the hallways, the waiting areas, anywhere there was space, and still the water outside kept rising. The next 3 days blurred together in a nightmare of heat, exhaustion, and growing desperation. Without reliable power, we were manually bagging patients who needed ventilator support, squeezing the airbag by hand to keep them breathing. We worked in shifts, 15 minutes bagging, then switch. My hands cramped, my arms ached, but we couldn't stop. If we stopped, people died. Linda never left Marcus's side. She learned to bag him herself, taking shifts with us. I watched this mother, who'd probably never held medical equipment in her life, keeping her son alive with her own hands. "Rest, Linda," I'd tell her. "Let us take over." "I can't," she'd say simply. "He's my baby." The heat was unbearable. Temperatures inside the hospital climbed over 100 degrees. Patients were dehydrating rapidly. Our water supply was dwindling. We'd started with bathtubs full of water, but with over 200 people now sheltering in the hospital, patients, staff, and refugees, everything was running out. On the third day, Mrs. Patterson developed a fever. Her surgical wound was infected. I needed antibiotics, but our pharmacy was flooded. Many medications destroyed or unreachable. I radioed down to the team trying to salvage supplies from lower floors, but the news wasn't good. The water's contaminated, one of the orderlies told me over the radio. Sewage, chemicals, everything. It's toxic, and it's up to the 4th floor now. Dorothy and I exchanged looks. We were on the 7th floor. The water was still 3 floors below us, but it was getting closer. And with each floor, it claimed, we lost more supplies, more equipment, more options. That afternoon, we heard the helicopters. The sound brought everyone to the windows. Coast Guard helicopters were flying over the city, pulling people off rooftops. We waved, shouted, used mirrors to reflect sunlight, trying to signal them. But they flew past, again and again. Why aren't they stopping? A young nurse named Jessica cried out. Can't they see we're here? Mr. Chen, the administrator, tried to stay calm. They'll come back. They're prioritizing roof rescues right now. We're in a building. We're safer than people exposed to the elements. They'll come back. But as the sun set on the 3rd day with no rescue, even he looked worried. That night, I sat with a group of nurses in the hallway, sharing a package of crackers we'd found in someone's locker. We were exhausted, filthy, our scrubs stained with sweat and worse. Dorothy sat with us, her gray hair plastered to her forehead. I've been a nurse for 35 years, she said quietly. I've worked through emergencies, disasters, staffing crises. But this, she trailed off, shaking her head. We can't keep going much longer. Not without help. What do we do? Jessica asked. She was 24, fresh out of nursing school. This was supposed to be her first year. Dorothy looked at each of us. We do what we always do. We take care of our patients. 1 hour at a time. 1 patient at a time. That's all we can control. Around 3 a.m., one of the refugees, a man in his 60s named Robert, who'd been helping us move supplies, collapsed from heat exhaustion. We got him to a bed, started an IV with our dwindling supplies of saline. His wife held his hand, her face etched with fear. Is he going to be okay? She asked me. I wanted to promise her yes. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine. But I'd learned in 3 days that I couldn't make promises anymore. We're doing everything we can, I said instead. Later that morning, as I was checking on Marcus, Linda pulled me aside. Be honest with me, she said. How long can you keep him alive like this, bagging him by hand? I looked at her son, this 19-year-old boy who'd been fighting so hard. As long as it takes, I told her. We won't give up on him. But you're exhausted, all of you. Her voice cracked. I see how hard you're working. I see you pushing yourselves past any reasonable limit. And I'm grateful. God, I'm so grateful. But I also know. She couldn't finish. I took her hand. Linda, listen to me. We're all tired, yes. We're running low on supplies. But we're not giving up. Not on Marcus. Not on anyone. Do you hear me? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for staying. Day 4. The morning we learned that rescue wasn't coming as quickly as we'd hoped. Mr. Chen called a meeting with the senior staff. Dorothy, the physician who'd stayed, Dr. Kumar, and a few others. I was included because I was coordinating ICU care. The news was devastating. I finally got through on a satellite phone, Mr. Chen said, his voice heavy. The National Guard is overwhelmed. The entire city is underwater. They're doing roof rescues first, then evacuating hospitals in order of urgency. They said we might not see evacuation for another 2 to 3 days. Silence filled the room. We don't have 2 to 3 days, Dr. Kumar said flatly. He was a thin man in his 50s, usually calm and methodical. Now his voice shook with exhaustion and frustration. We're out of IV fluids. We're almost out of medications. The water supply is contaminated. People are getting sick from the heat. And we have patients on manual ventilation who need electricity and proper equipment. I know, Mr. Chen said quietly, but I'm telling you what they told me. We have to hold on. Dorothy stood up. Then we make a plan. We prioritize. We make our resources last. What followed was the most difficult conversation of my life. We had to decide, if it came down to it, which patients would receive the limited supplies we had left. How would we allocate the remaining IV fluids, the remaining medications, the remaining energy from exhausted staff? We follow triage protocols, Dr. Kumar said. Those most likely to survive with treatment. We focus our resources there. I felt sick. You're talking about choosing who lives and dies. I'm talking about maximizing survival, he said, but I could see the anguish in his eyes. I hate this as much as you do. But if we spread ourselves too thin, we lose everyone. We created a color-coded system. Green for stable patients who could wait, yellow for serious but manageable cases, red for critical patients requiring immediate intervention, and black, a category none of us wanted to use, for patients beyond our ability to save with current resources. Walking back to the ICU after that meeting, I felt like I was drowning. How could I look at my patients, at Linda and Marcus, at Mrs. Patterson, and see colored codes instead of human beings? That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson's condition worsened dramatically. Her fever spiked to 104. The infection was spreading, and without proper antibiotics, without surgical intervention, she was deteriorating rapidly. Dorothy and I stood by her bedside, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "Ma'am," I said softly, "can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. "My daughter," she whispered. "Margaret. She lives in Atlanta. Does she know I'm here? We're going to get you to her," I promised, hoping desperately it was true. "You hold on, okay?" But that night, Mrs. Patterson's heart stopped. We tried to resuscitate her. Dr. Kumar led the code while I did chest compressions. But without proper equipment, without the medications we needed, she was gone. Dorothy called the time of death at 11:47 p.m. I walked into the stairwell and cried. I'd lost patients before. It's part of being a nurse. But this was different. She died, not because we didn't know what to do, but because we didn't have the resources to do it. She died because help hadn't come. Dorothy found me there 20 minutes later. She sat beside me on the steps, saying nothing at first. Finally, she spoke. "You did everything you could. It wasn't enough." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't. But Sarah, you need to understand something. We're not going to save everyone. We can't. Not under these conditions. But we can save some. And those people, the ones who make it because we stayed, because we fought, they matter. Their lives matter. You have to hold on to that." I wiped my eyes. "How do you do it? How do you keep going?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think about my daughter. She's a teacher in Houston, safe. And I think about what I'd want someone to do if she were in one of these beds. I'd want them to try. Even if the odds were impossible, even if they were exhausted and scared, I'd want them to try." She looked at me. "So I try. For someone else's daughter, someone else's son. I try." We sat there together in the darkness, two nurses in a flooded hospital, surrounded by impossible choices and dwindling hope. But when we stood up and went back to the ICU, we tried. Day 6, the day the helicopters finally came for us. We'd spent the previous day preparing. The military had radioed that evacuation would begin at dawn. They'd land on the roof, take the most critical patients first, then work through the rest. We had to have everyone ready. All night, nurses and volunteers worked to prepare patients for transport. We stabilized, documented, packed what medications and equipment we could carry. Marcus would be among the first evacuated. Manual ventilation couldn't continue much longer. Linda packed a small bag with his belongings, her hands shaking. "You'll be with him," I assured her. "They won't separate you." "What about you?" she asked. "When do the nurses evacuate?" "We go last," I said. "We make sure everyone else gets out first." Her eyes filled with tears. "You've been bagging my son for 6 days. You've saved his life. How do I ever thank you for that?" I hugged her tight. "You get him to a hospital. You watch him recover. That's thanks enough." Dawn broke hot and oppressive. The sound of helicopter rotors was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The first Black Hawk landed on the roof at 6:15 a.m. Military personnel jumped out, all business, assessing and organizing. Getting Marcus to the roof was terrifying. We had to carry him up 2 flights of stairs while continuing manual ventilation. I bagged him while 2 orderlies carried the stretcher. Linda walked beside us, one hand on her son's leg, never breaking contact. My arms screamed with exhaustion, but I kept rhythm. Squeeze, release, keeping him breathing. On the roof, the downwash from the helicopter was intense, deafening. A paramedic took over bagging while they loaded Marcus. Linda climbed in beside him, then turned back to look at me. She shouted something, but I couldn't hear over the rotors. She pressed her hand to her heart, then pointed at me. I nodded, understanding. Then the helicopter lifted off, carrying them to safety. The evacuations continued all day. Helicopter after helicopter landed, loaded patients, and left. We worked in teams. Some nurses stayed with patients on the upper floors, others helped with the roof transfers. Dorothy coordinated everything with military precision, her voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. Around noon, during a brief pause between helicopters, I stood at the edge of the roof and looked out over the city. From 7 stories up, the devastation was overwhelming. New Orleans, the city I loved, was gone, submerged, destroyed. Whole neighborhoods were just rooftops jutting from toxic water. In the distance, I could see the Superdome, where thousands were sheltering in unimaginable conditions. It's hard to believe, isn't it, Dorothy said beside me, that this was a thriving city less than a week ago. How long will it take to rebuild? I wondered. Years, she said quietly, if they rebuild at all. Some places might be gone forever. By evening, all the patients were evacuated. The refugees who'd sheltered with us were being transported to collection points where they'd be bused to other cities. The hospital was nearly empty. Just the medical staff remained. 15 nurses, doctors, and administrators who'd stayed through everything. The last helicopter arrived at dusk. As we climbed aboard, I looked back at Charity Hospital, this massive building that had been our fortress and our prison for the past 6 days. The water was finally receding, leaving a brown stain 3 stories high on the walls. The building looked wounded, dying. "You think it'll reopen?" Jessica asked. No one answered. We all knew the truth. Charity Hospital, which had served New Orleans for over 260 years, had likely treated its last patient. The helicopter flew us to Baton Rouge. I stared out the window as we flew over the flooded city, seeing the full scope of the disaster for the first time. Tens of thousands of houses underwater, boats floating down what used to be streets, bodies, both human and animal, visible in the floodwaters. The pilot's voice came through the headset. Estimated death toll is over 1,000, maybe more. We're still finding people. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. 1,000 people, 1,000 families destroyed, 1,000 stories ended. We landed at a makeshift triage center set up in a Baton Rouge convention hall. As we climbed out of the helicopter, Red Cross volunteers rushed forward with water, food, blankets. A woman wrapped a blanket around my shoulders even though it was 90 degrees. "You're safe now," she said kindly. "You're safe." But I didn't feel safe. I felt numb, disconnected, like I'd left part of myself back in that hospital, back in those 6 days of impossible heat and impossible choices. Dorothy found me sitting on a cot an hour later. She looked as exhausted as I felt, her eyes hollow. "I talked to Mr. Chen," she said. "He confirmed what we suspected. Charity's closed, permanently." "What do we do now?" I asked. "We rebuild," she said simply. "Somewhere, somehow, we rebuild." It's been 20 years since Katrina, Margaret. 20 years since those 6 days that changed everything. In the weeks after the evacuation, I learned that Marcus survived. He was transferred to a hospital in Houston, weaned off the ventilator, and eventually made a full recovery. Linda sent me a letter 3 months later with a photo of Marcus standing, smiling, alive. She'd included a note, "Thank you for giving me my son back. You are my hero forever." I keep that photo on my refrigerator. On hard days, I look at it and remember why I became a nurse. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Margaret, yes, she had the same name as you, found me through a Red Cross registry. We met for coffee in Baton Rouge. She cried. I cried. She thanked me for being with her mother at the end, for making sure she wasn't alone. That conversation was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most important. Her mother mattered. Her death mattered. Someone needed to bear witness to that. The 15 of us who stayed at Charity Hospital scattered after the storm. Some left nursing entirely. The trauma was too much. Some returned to New Orleans as it slowly rebuilt. Some, like me, moved to other cities, carrying the weight of those days wherever we went. Dorothy stayed in nursing until she retired 5 years ago. She moved to Oregon to be near her daughter and grandchildren. We still email each other every few weeks. Sometimes we talk about Katrina. Mostly we don't need to. We understand each other in a way that people who weren't there never will. Jessica, the young nurse who'd been so scared, became a disaster response specialist. She's been deployed to hurricanes, earthquakes, floods all over the world. After Katrina, she told me years later, I knew I couldn't run from disaster anymore. I had to run toward it, to help, to make sure no one feels as alone as we felt. Charity Hospital never reopened. The building still stands, a massive, empty monument to everything that was lost. There's talk of converting it to something else, but for now, it just sits there, a ghost building in a slowly recovering city. I moved to Houston after the storm, got a job at a hospital there. Eventually, I transferred to the ICU again. Some people thought I was crazy. Why would I go back to critical care after what I'd experienced? But I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Those 6 days at Charity, as horrible as they were, reminded me of why I became a nurse. Not for the easy days, but for the impossible ones. For the moments when someone's life hangs in the balance and your hands, your knowledge, your refusal to give up, makes the difference. My marriage didn't survive Katrina. James supported me, tried to understand, but the woman who came back from that hospital wasn't the same woman who'd kissed him goodbye on August 28th. I had nightmares, depression, PTSD that I didn't acknowledge for years. He tried, but eventually we drifted apart. We divorced in 2008. He remarried someone lovely. My daughters, Emma and Sophie, are grown now, both in their 20s. They're proud of what I did, though I think they also worry about me. They see how the anniversary affects me every year, how I get quiet and withdrawn as August approaches. People ask me sometimes what it was like, what I saw, what I felt, how I kept going, and I never know what to say. How do you explain the weight of those days? The heat, the fear, the desperation? How do you describe making life and death decisions with no good options? How do you convey the bond between 15 medical professionals who held each other up when everything was falling apart? I can't explain it. Not really. But I can tell you this. Those 6 days taught me that humans are capable of extraordinary resilience and compassion in the face of unimaginable circumstances. I saw people work until they collapsed, then get up and work more. I saw mothers keep their children alive with nothing but determination and love. I saw a city devastated but not defeated. Hurricane Katrina killed over 1,800 people. It destroyed entire communities. It revealed systemic failures in disaster response, racial inequities in rescue efforts, and government incompetence at every level. It was a tragedy of unimaginable scale. But it also revealed something else, the capacity of ordinary people to be extraordinary. The nurse who worked 30 hours straight to keep patients alive, the orderly who waded through contaminated water to salvage supplies, the mother who learned to manually ventilate her son, the administrator who stayed calm when everything was chaos, the doctor who made impossible choices with grace and compassion. I'm not a hero, Margaret. None of us who stayed at Charity Hospital are heroes. We were just people doing our jobs under circumstances no one should ever face. We made mistakes. We lost patients we should have saved. We carry guilt and grief that 20 years hasn't erased. But we tried. When it would have been easier to give up, to walk away, to say the situation was hopeless, we tried. And some people lived because we tried. Marcus lived. Robert lived. Dozens of others lived. That has to mean something. I'm sending you this letter because I need someone to know the full story. Not the sanitized version, not the heroic narrative, but the truth. Messy, painful, complicated truth. I need someone to know about Mrs. Patterson, about the impossible choices, about the crying in stairwells, and the terror of hearing water rise. For 20 years, I've carried this alone. Now I'm giving it to you, to your audience, to anyone who'll listen. Not because I want sympathy or recognition, but because these stories need to be told. The people who lived through Katrina, who died in Katrina, who were changed by Katrina, we matter. Our experiences matter. And as the years pass and memories fade, someone needs to remember. So I'm asking you, Margaret, to share this, to help people understand what it was really like. Not the news footage, not the statistics, but the human experience, the fear and courage, the loss and survival, the worst and best of what people can be. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. With gratitude and exhaustion, Sarah Mitchell, former ICU nurse, Charity Hospital, New Orleans. Margaret sets down the final page of Sarah's letter, her hands trembling slightly. She removes her reading glasses and wipes her eyes. That was Sarah's story, dear friends. Every word of it true. Every moment lived. I've been reading your stories for 15 years now, and I've learned that sometimes the most extraordinary heroism looks like simply showing up, simply refusing to leave, simply squeezing an airbag hour after hour, to keep someone breathing. Sarah asked me to share her story, and I've done so tonight. Perhaps some of you lived through Katrina yourselves. Perhaps you know nurses, doctors, first responders who stayed when others left. If so, thank you. Your courage rippled outward, touching more lives than you'll ever know. And to Sarah, wherever you are tonight, thank you for trusting me with your truth. You are seen, you are heard, and yes, what you did matters. It will always matter.